All right, we'll make a start then. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Thanks for joining our session. We are both learning advisors from AUT New Zealand. And just to clarify, we are in New Zealand, but you might hear from our voices that our accents, that we are originally both from the UK as well. So we were just talking about the time differences between New Zealand and the UK and having to make those phone calls or video chats. I always just have to Google, what time is it in the UK? Mark's been working for AUT for 12 years, and this is my 4th year in the role. So if you may have done this before, but if you could just in the chat, perhaps introduce yourself. Who are you? Where do you work? And maybe the name of your role, just to see who's here. And where you're from. So that's great. Thank you. I see some familiar names. Hi, Lucy. Thanks, Karina. Hi. Thanks, Tanya. Hi, Claire. Thanks, Karen. Thank you. So I should be saying good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. Today's session, what we're looking at, we're interested in these 2 provocations that came out with the expressions of interest. So we're looking at what types of evidence are we providing of impacts to institutional leadership? So what types of evidence of our current practice, of our work, and then what types of evidence should we be providing to leadership instead or as well? So we think this is important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, with institutions and governments tightening their budgets, we're often called upon to justify our value. And then secondly, we also have a limited sense of the impact of our pedagogies on students. So that's why we're interested in thinking about impact and evidence and what we currently do and what we might like to do in the future. So again, just asking for some audience participation in one word or phrase, just thinking about your own context. What does impact mean in your work context? So just pop your ideas in the chat. Thanks, Lucy. Benefit to students or lecturers. Yeah. A bucket load of page views, some good analytics. Yeah. Independent learners. Yeah. Behavior, attitudes and outcomes. Great. Showing change, positive change. Yep, Karina. Karina and Quentin, very similar ideas. Positive. Don't put them in brackets. Positive should be out there. Empowering students. Yeah, great. Thank you. Empowering, touching. Yeah. Lasting learning, maybe something that's sustainable. Something that's longer term. Thanks for that. Keep them coming if you want to. But just in doing that exercise, that idea is that we all have different views of what impact is. And so some of the challenges of collecting evidence, some of the challenges of collecting evidence we can see is that impact means different things in different institutions. And so impact is inherently complex and messy. So why did we just decide to talk about this? So looking at those things, making a positive change, making a positive difference, touching students, empowering students, developing self-regulated learners, showing students notice are there. Yeah. So just going back to some of the literature, learning advisors are deployed to make a difference. So whatever that is, in whichever capacity, in whichever role you're in, we're trying to make some kind of difference. And that could be to students, to staff, to our teams. But what we can see in the literature too is that there are variations in context because our positions and roles vary. Today we were talking, we had some presenters who were learning strategists. I think we've got learning advisors here, we've got learning developers, we've got leaders. So we have various contexts, and so the space of learning advice and learning development is quite flexible. We all do different things. Our everyday job looks quite different. And that means that there's a lack of consistency in collecting evidence. It's very hard for us to decide how do we do it, what do we do, how is that comparable to what other places or other institutions do. So for today's session, when we're talking about impact, we're going to really sort of try and focus in on the impact of what. So what is it that we do? What are our current practices? And the impact of what on what? And how do we communicate that? And who do we communicate that to? So if we just take one of our examples, so something we do in our practice, embedded teaching practices and activities. So we want to look at the impact. Mark, we are recording, yes? Yes, okay. Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, we carried on recording. So what we want to have a look at, so part of our current practice, embedded teaching activities. So how do we look at impact? How do we collect evidence of what we're doing in that space? We might use student and lecturer evaluation and feedback. We may be conducting research projects in that space. To see how that impacts students and staff. And then communicating those results, those findings, maybe through student lecturer feedback and the research findings. And then we might communicate that within our department, our teams, wherever they may sit. We may communicate that to our institution. And that might, somebody had a good expression, we go up and across. You might be reporting up, you might be reporting across different teams, and then also you may be reporting to the wider academic community. So just giving you sort of an example of impact of what on what and how we communicate it. And then Mark's going to take over and give you some more examples.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so those are a couple of examples Rachel's talked through of evidence. And then we'll just take a quick look at what the literature says counts as evidence. So one of our colleagues, Lucy McNaught, who's with us in the session, together we conducted a systematic review of 20 empirical studies that reported on the impacts of embedding. As you can see, the most common types of evidence presented are the red bits, so student and staff perceptions. In the green, changes in academic performance and student writing. Those accounted for only about half of that amount of the perceptions data. And other types of evidence were rarely included. And when we looked at the data types used for claims about impact, questionnaires, interviews and focus groups gave us data about student and staff perceptions, or perhaps staff perceptions of their own academic identities. And also writing samples gave a little bit of data about staff perceptions. And that's noteworthy because most of the evidence that's in support of embedded practices, that's 56% of all the impact data in those studies, is based only on what participants thought or felt. And if you contrast that, the writing samples and the assessment grades mainly yielded data about student use of writing features and academic performance, and that was after embedded interventions, and that accounted for only 27% of all the impact data. So overall, it's not a particularly persuasive collection of evidence in support of embedding. Hopefully that gives you a sense of where we're coming from regarding the evidence of our work. I'll hand back over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. So how we're going to run the session is sort of trying to invite you to share with you how you currently collect evidence and report, not just on embedding that we've given you the examples of, but also how do you currently collect evidence on generic workshops, individual consultations, or other work that you might do. So what we've got is a Microsoft form. And the idea of that is to try and help us gather the most information we can in this short session. So rather than having an open discussion, we're going to try and capture some of that information in the forms so that we can then collate that information and compare over the two sessions that we've done, sort of what's coming out in the comments and the notes. And then we're going to report back in a blog post, like Karen said before. We're going to report back in a blog post about collecting evidence. So really, perhaps think about your current practice, what you do, what are some of the offerings, what are some of the things that you do, and how do you collect evidence on that. So feel free to click on the link in the slide or use a QR code and you can open up the form on another device. I can also just pop the link into the chat. So if you can just have a look at the form, we've got, I've forgotten how many questions, 4 questions. Yeah, we've got 4 questions. So if you have a look and have a think, and then what we'll do is once people have started sort of having a think and putting in some of their comments, we can have a look at what other people have written about in the session before. Thank you. I can see people adding to the results. And if you want to have a look, if you've finished or if you're still writing, please do keep writing. But what we can see is just what people are sharing. So we can see in this first one, how do you currently collect evidence of your embedded teaching activities? Who does this get communicated to? NA, thank you. And then we've got attendance lists, Excel spreadsheets, evaluations, focus groups, interviews, examples, and then reporting back to team manager, director, schools, and CE. And then again, supervisor surveys, student text before and after teaching, write findings up as research articles, sharing findings in Q1 journals, sharing with colleagues, direct management, wider academic community, and writing up research findings as blog posts to try and reach the wider community. I think I know who wrote that one.
So do I.
Participant feedback, not very satisfactory. I think, yeah, that seemed to be a theme earlier on as well, sort of questionnaires and feedback over evaluating or asking people. People get a bit of feedback fatigue, don't they? And often we don't get representative numbers. So participant feedback, report to manager, head of L&T, questionnaires to gather feedback on confidence before and after sessions. A short survey after every workshop. What are your main learnings? So very student focused. And then another example is assurance of learning team collects data on student performance and compares performances in units with embedded learning support with units with no embedded. So having a comparison between perhaps interventions and no interventions. And then the next one, number of embedded classes. So looking at the data, looking at analytics, and then student perceptions. So again, sort of going with that theme of what we were talking about before, a lot of staff, a lot of student perceptions in our current practice, lots of those things. And if we have a look. Yeah, Daniel, yeah. And also often we talk about the anxious able students, the students who perhaps perceive themselves as not confident or not able, but are, yeah. And if we have a look, how do you currently collect evidence of your centrally offered generic adjunct classes or workshops, Excel spreadsheets? I try to stay away from generic classes. Ditto, surveys, headcounts, communication departments, lots of Excel. Everybody likes an Excel spreadsheet. Ethics approved processes, research projects and data collection. Yeah, Martina. Feedback forms, questionnaires. Reporting back to the provost and doctoral research committee.
Yep. What's our TINA, if anyone would like to clarify?
Is that some kind of software or some kind of... There's a couple of people writing, so maybe they're going to enlighten us on our TINA. And again, just looking, we've got attendance data, questionnaires.
Artina is the software that we would use. Oh, I should put my camera on, but it's quite dark now. So we record all of our meetings with students in this program, which is called Artina. So we don't have access. We as learning advisors don't have access to the broader view. We just put our individual statistics in, but those who earn a lot more than us probably can just spit out the reports from it. But we don't have access to it.
And that's something that we're going to talk about a bit later, just in terms of barriers to how, there are barriers to having access to information or to seeing records, or so we're limited in the kind of evidence we can access, really. I think somebody earlier on called them woohoo forms, or somebody was just talking about, lots of record keeping, lots of admin in terms of collecting the evidence. And again, lots of student feedback, student surveys seem to be the most common go-to. If we look at number 3, online resources. So we've got centralized Moodle pages, views on, so number of views, people looking at pages, page views, looking at resources, and again, anecdotal evidence. And seems to be a theme in the confidence, the pre and post confidence. And I think Claire Brown was talking about that too, pre and post session confidence ratings with pre-arrival students, but not in-program students. And again, more page views. And data analytics. So a few similarities going on across our different countries. There we only had 3 questions. That's all good. So thank you. Well, keep adding, keep writing. And that was just to give us an idea of what we're doing currently. And then thinking about how things might be different. What else could we be doing? So I'll stop sharing that for now. And we'll go back to our... So handing back over to Mark.
Yep, thanks very much, Rachel. So before we move on to the second question that we're going to ask you to respond to, we just want to do a little scene setting by sharing a current research project that we're doing. It's called Impacts and Descriptions of Embedded Academic Literacy, or IDEAL. The context is an embedding collaboration between learning advisors, faculty, student success staff, and the course lead lecturer of a large first-year undergraduate business course. And we have 3 research questions that we hope will help us identify pedagogies for teaching students discipline-specific academic literacy knowledge using an embedded approach, the impacts of those pedagogies on students and teaching staff, and also appropriate research methods for investigating all of those things. So to gather evidence about the impacts, we're going to be collecting all of these types of data that I'm just clicking through here. And we're going to compare and triangulate those. I can't make all the connections in that diagram, but we are going to look for them. And the reason that we're doing this is because we're frankly sick to the back teeth of some barriers that we face in our role as learning advisors. One is that institutional understanding and awareness of our work is low, and along with that, investment in it is low by those who make decisions about how money gets spent. And we think we've got a responsibility to change that. Based on the review that Lucy and I did previously, we know the evidence base for embedding's weak, so it's not really that easy for decision makers to actually get behind it, even if they might intrinsically kind of like it, intuitively like it. And that's the second barrier that we're tackling in that research. What evidence can we provide to make a more persuasive case for the work that we do? I'll hand back over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. So we're going to look at another form, but before we look at the form, we can just look at the questions within the form. So obviously looking at that research project and thinking about the different ways of collecting evidence and looking at what we can find out from the research made us think about what are different types of evidence that we might be collecting. In an ideal world, without time or money pressures, what will we do? So the questions that we're going to look at now is, in your own institutional context, without any limitations, what changes could your team make to types of evidence you're reporting on? And then what barriers do you face in doing so? How do you think you could overcome those? And any other comments? And in this second form, there is a second part. So if you are interested in keeping the conversation going, or if this is something that interests you, you can add your name and your email to that form, and we can create something. Thank you, Quentin. Yes, we're going to go into that form and you can fill that out. But yeah, thinking perhaps longer term, what can we do longer term? What could we do shorter term? Without any limitations, what would your idea be of collecting evidence? So, yes to longitudinal. Yes, that would be a dream, wouldn't it? So here's the next form. You can click into the form, click on the link. I will put the link in the chat too if you need a copy.
Just try as much as you can with the first question to throw the shackles off and just say what would you really like. Don't worry about editing it out or the people who are going to say no. Just what would you really like? That's the first question.
Quentin's given us a good model, or a good example.
I guess turning that one round, I suspect I know whose comment that one is. at the top there. What would the again, thinking ideal world here, what would the people at the other end of those choices, those decisions, need to hear to have their minds changed?
Yeah, I'm really interested in that. At one end, we do have leadership who are supportive of those kind of ideas, but they themselves are limited. It's one thing to say, if we had no limitation, what would we do? But even given the aspiration, we've got to somehow make that move within our leadership. I suppose get them to see the aspiration. I think that's a challenge in and of itself, isn't it? And and one of the things that I think is quite big and huge as evidence is to hear student stories. I'm a firm believer in student stories of hearing how they've progressed. Individuals from all sectors of life, they're really, really beautiful and strong and resilient.
And I totally agree, Tanya. And also staff stories too, people that you're working with, the lecturers, and perhaps collaborations that you've had. And I think, like you say, getting people on board or having buy-in to what we do is a big thing as well. Spreading the word.
Yeah, I guess so. I would add to that. Based on the review that Lucy and I did, we seem to be pretty good at that. We do collect a lot of that information and we communicate it. But nonetheless, it doesn't seem that we sort of get a lot of impact from the people above us who do make the decisions. I've never heard anyone say I don't want to hear those stories. I think they do, but maybe there's some other bits and pieces we can put before them with that would make it even easier for them to see why it's really important, worth spending money on.
Yeah. So what we might do is just have a quick brief look at the answers to those questions. I'm conscious of time, so we can just have a quick brief read through. If there's anything that stands out or anything that people want to comment on, please do. So just reminding ourselves, in your own institutional context, without any limitations, what changes could your team make to types of evidence you're reporting on? So at AUT, it might be useful learning advisors and info librarians to work more closely with the student services team. They have access to different data sets, so perhaps more collaboration, different teams could be. And then taking into account some limitations to programs of study, trace changes in student writing, trace staff responses across our undergraduate program. Yeah, dedicated research team with ample time across various years, and doesn't account for sort of high turnover and staff turnover and keeping those students. Yeah, one can but dream. Another, tracking connections between assessments and workplace tasks. This could inform improvements to program design and assessment choice. Another, longitudinal research, just to add to those. We're trying to keep our jobs, so it's a brutal place to be. Yeah. So how do we showcase our value? How do we show people what we do. Going back to Tanya's, more stories, more opportunities. Yeah.
Can I just chime in again?
Yeah.
I think the sort of related issue is if we can get some of this sort of really good information about the impact beyond the bounds of our institutions and share it with the wider community in publications of various sorts, I think again it becomes more irresistible for institutions if you can see that there's some solid evidence backing up certain practices that have value and that benefit students. I think it's politically harder to ignore.
Thanks, Danielle. You've got to add one thing. Looking at cross-referencing impact with students within attainment gaps to really help target interventions in a challenging economic environment. Yeah. Thank you. So I'll just briefly look through. I'll just scroll through them. So again, longitudinal projects. So let's just have a quick look at the barriers. Probably lots of nodding going on here. We all have similar territorial, lack of understanding, mismatch of expectations, lots of nods. Time, resources, where do I start? Universities pumping students out and not closely tracking how they may or may not use learning from their degree in life after uni. So there's issues of access, uptake, student feedback fatigue, shame and stigma. And that idea of where are we helping, or where are we positioned and where do we come? I think that in the session before we were talking about sort of marginalised or peripheral support rather than being where we need to be. Lack of understanding of our roles still. Too many people and not enough of us. Yeah. There are lots of interesting comments there. And then some suggestions for overcoming them. Lots of great comments, and what we'll do is we'll collate all of these and write them into the blog post. So we don't have enough time to sort of go into everything in detail. And thanks, Ursula, for your comment there as well. Yeah. So we've just got one last slide just to talk about what happens next. Otherwise, Mark will be telling me I need to finish. Mark's going to be the timekeeper.
I'm already clearly doing that, aren't I? Yes.
He'll give me the 3-minute time limit. So if we just really enjoyed reading all your comments and all the conversations that we've started. So really, thanks a lot for your participation and contributions. Really interesting. Obviously, we have shared issues and challenges, and then there are some which are unique to your own institutions. If you do think of other things that you'd like to add, or you need some more time to fill in the forms, the form will be open till Sunday, 6th of April, New Zealand time. You can work out what time that is in your own time zone. And you can also contact Mark and myself through our email addresses. And Mark has just put in the chat the ICALLD blog. So watch the space. We'll work in the next couple of weeks to try and sort of look at what you've written, look at the contributions, and produce something that we can all share within our community. So any other comments or feedback? I think we've got a minute before the next speakers come on. Any other comments, Mark?
Unmute. Just to say thanks so much for all the great participation. This has been fantastic. I couldn't have anticipated how productive this has been. So thank you very much.
Thank you.